Yes, I'm an old man.
So, as we get finishing up today, I just want to comment on this one more time. Specified complexity is a weird thing. The best way I can explain it is this. All right, if we were to use Legos as an illustration, complexity would be a pile of bricks. So you got a pile of Lego bricks. Each brick has a purpose, but it's just kind of a pile, but it's still some complexity to it. It's not simple. It's not stupid. There's something there. Now, as you get to specified complexity, it is the idea of taking all of those building blocks and making something interesting out of it. So the idea of specified complexity is the difference between just a pile of building blocks and actually putting those together to make something out of them. So anyway, okay. As we get into creation, this is truth. The idea is the entire Trinity is involved in the act of creation. We know, first of all, that the Holy Spirit is involved because it says the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. It's pretty clear what that means. Now, the ancient Jew would have had a conception of specifically two powers of the Godhead. So the Jewish conception would have fit with the idea that there were two powers in heaven. They had not delineated it all out. But as you get into the New Testament, that's the revelation of the entire Trinity. And so John 1:1 would explain this idea that Jesus was there involved. So the Bible says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then later on it says that all things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. So we know for sure that Jesus was involved, and that's what John says. We also know that Jehovah, specifically the covenant name of God here, created everything. So there are multiple passages throughout the Bible that will show that. And typically we take that to mean God the Father. But again, we can see all members of the Trinity involved there. Okay? As you look on page 4 in your notes, you're going to see the days of creation laid out for you. Day 1, God's going to create light. And so it says here in verse 3, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. Now, this is important because there is not actually a light source yet. Okay? And so if some of you remember from our discussion yesterday, the idea here is that God himself is the light. So most likely the normal day-night cycle and all of that good stuff probably didn't take place until the actual structures that do that were in place. And so most likely there's just language of days passing being used here, but there's no one to even see it yet. So it could have, God could have created a day-night cycle on this watery blob. There's nothing to say that he didn't. But again, the sun, moon, stars, all of the stuff that actually make the day-night cycle work aren't here yet. So I'm just assuming. Okay? So you see there, it says he created light. He called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Okay? This makes sense if you think about it. If God's standing on one side of the planet, that side is going to be lit up, the other side is going to be dark. And so when it's dark, it's nighttime, and when it's light, it's daytime, and there you go. All right? This is why I referenced the mythology aspect. Again, not that it's untrue, but that it's the origin of all of these things, and that's where we get this idea of the day-night cycle. Okay? Day 2, he creates the firmament. How this works, you got the darkness is upon the face of the deep, and he inserts in between these two spheres an expanse, which is called the firmament. All right? And so the firmament is this expansive space that basically is the universe. Because where does he put the stars? He puts the stars in the firmament of heaven. Okay? He also puts the moon in the firmament of heaven. And it doesn't mention planets because it doesn't really fit into our discussion, but obviously he puts the planets there too because they're out there.
Basically call the stars planets because planets essentially look like stars.
It could have been, yeah. Planet comes from the Greek word wanderer, because what they're doing is they're looking up, they're seeing all the stars, and they're noticing that some of them don't follow the pattern of other stars, and so they're like, oh, there's something different up there. So they call them wanderers. So yeah, that very well could be the conception. again, we remember that today we have a very scientific mindset where we have to classify everything.
Yeah.
One of the things, as you get into some of like the laws of Deuteronomy, it's going to say things like, no, you can't eat bats or other birds. And they're like, oh, a bat's not a bird. Well, the word means flying things, but a bat's a flying thing, so the Bible's not trying to be scientifically precise, because that's not what the culture that produced it was trying to do. All right, day 3, dry land appears. So by day 3, here you've got basically, this is going to look like an eyeball, but you've got the dry land that appears.
Happy though, it's got a big smile.
It's Mike Wazowski. All right.
Why does he have a lip tattoo that says Firmament?
He's hardcore. So this is earth as in the sense of the dry ground, like dirt, not earth as in the planet. Okay, so just keep that separated. So the dry land appears. Day 4, he puts the sun, moon, and stars out there in the firmament of heaven. Day 5, he creates the water animals and the flying creatures. Hopefully you don't have to type this whole thing because it is in your notes. And day 6, cattle, creeping things, land animals. And then day 7, which is not a day of creating. It's part of the creation week, but it is his day of rest. So that's why day 7 is weird, because it doesn't follow the patterns of day 1 through 6. The reason I bring that up so often is because, John Lennox, in his 7 days that divide the world, he's going to keep bringing that up, that, hey, day 7 never ended actually. So therefore, if day 7 took longer than a day, how come we couldn't make the case that the other days took longer than a day? Because day 7 doesn't follow the pattern of the creation week, because God doesn't do on day 7 what he did on days 1 through 6. So it doesn't fit the pattern because it's not meant to fit the pattern. So again, note the creation week models the normal week. Each week begins with work, ending on the 7th day with the Sabbath. Now, pop quiz. Sabbath is which day of the week? Saturday. So, the Sabbath is Saturday. That's what it was. Our day of worship went to Sunday in honor of the resurrection of Christ, but it's not the Sabbath. So just understand, like, Sunday is not the Sabbath. So Sabbath is Saturday. Okay? Now, God is going to start creating man. So as you get toward the end of chapter 1, you're going to see him start talking, and he's going to say things like, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, etc., etc. Man is formed at the end of the creation week. This is specifically day 6. This also involved bringing all the animals to man, and the naming of them, and the creation of woman. So here's kind of the chronological pattern. If we put chapters 1 and 2 together, we get the idea that God creates, on day 6, the animals. All right, so day 6. Now remember, the Hebrew reckoning, day begins at about 6 p.m. or so. That's why you'll keep seeing the idea of evening and morning, first day, evening and morning, second day, evening and morning. Okay, so the evening and the morning are the day, and then it ends, and then you start the next day. All right, so sometime, probably evening, you have the creation of animals. Sometime after that, which who knows how long that took, it probably was an instantaneous thing where God's like, and animals, all right? He creates mankind, all right? And as he creates mankind, he creates a place, a specific garden to put him in. And so sometime in this period, you have a garden created. So whether it's here or here, who cares, doesn't really matter, but somewhere in that span. So you have the garden created, and then mankind, so here's your little garden. Mankind is plopped there inside the garden. As he is there, God begins to then bring all the animals to him. All right? All the animals are brought. He names them all. Now remember, that doesn't mean that like every species of dog existed at this time. Doesn't mean that every species of bird and he's not naming the bacteria. You know, there's certain creatures who probably don't fall under the purview of, you're going to name this, all right? Yeah, that one, a little mutated.
Rat.
So he's naming animals, all right? So all these animals are coming to him. He's naming them. They go back, all right? And he realizes that, there's something unique about all these animals. All of these animals have a mate. They have kind of they're a pair. Where's mine? You know, like, I'm so lonely. All right? So when God realizes, well, not God realizes, when Adam realized that he's alone and he has no one to hug, God puts him to sleep. He takes out a rib. All right? He puts him to sleep. Adam wakes up, sees Eve, says, "Whoa, man!" And that's where we get her name.
You're really funny.
Yeah, I know.
Can I throw this at you?
You can try, but you'd probably miss. Moving on. So as we have the creation of man, he wakes up. He sees woman, and he says, "Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh," and all that wonderful poetic stuff. And her name eventually becomes known as Eve. But at the beginning, they're both referred to as Adam, which has the idea of man, like, okay, like, hey, humankind, okay? So eventually, Adam will become the term for the male, and Eve, because mother of all living, will become the name of the woman, but that's how this works. All right, so Genesis 1 seems to be told from God's point of view. So the days of creation are kind of laid out. Part of your homework, if you want to call that, for tonight is to read through the handout on the day that I just gave you, so you can kind of get a feeling for why I believe what I do on the days of creation. But Genesis 1 seems to be told from God's point of view. In fact, all throughout it's going to use that word Elohim for God. It's just a description of where God lives and the point of view. Genesis 2 kind of seems to be from Adam's point of view. Kind of like Adam is, I mean, he's not really, I think, but it's almost like he's keeping record and saying like, oh yeah, and God made this garden for me, and he brought these animals to me, and then he put me to sleep. And it just seems to be told, if it's not from Adam's point of view, it's definitely human-centric. So it's focused in on the man. There's one expression here I just want to point out. Hopefully you guys know this already because I've kind of mentioned it in passing. But you'll start to see here in verse number 5 of Genesis chapter 2, it says, "And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, every herb of the field before it grew, for the Lord had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground." And so it's talking about God creating plants. And if you take the Genesis 1 pattern, you're like, wait, plants were created well before this. This specifically is talking about cultivated plants. And so basically it's saying, yes, there were plants, but none of them were cultivated plants. Like none of these plants were shaped or formed or done anything with by humans because there wasn't a man to till the ground yet. So if you pay attention to little context clues like that one that says there was not a man to till the ground, you'll understand it's talking about plants that you would till the ground to plant. So again, part of it comes down to giving the passage of the benefit of the doubt that it meant to say what it did. But people who like to take things hyper literally will go like, it says there's no plants, but it said earlier there should be plants. Look at that contradiction. It's like, come on, do you really think they made that big of a mistake between 1 and 2? Like, do you think no one reading Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 back to back would go, Carl, you made a mistake here. You said plants came, but then they weren't. Oh, good catch. No, obviously the ancient writer would be able to go, huh. Oops. All right. Now, you will see that Genesis 2 seems to be from his point of view. He didn't know exactly when the animals were created at that point. So it's talking about God forming the animals and bringing to him. So you can almost see where if Adam were the one telling the story, he's like, yeah, and so God made these animals, and then he just started bringing them to me. It's not saying that they were made after he was. It's just saying like, hey, God made them, and after I came into existence, he brought them to me. So again, just letting the language speak and not reading into it so much that you nullify the plain reading of like chapter 1 and 2. So they're made and paraded. Okay. Next one, this understanding of Toledot, which means what?
The genealogy of.
These are the generations of. So the generations of. So that generations talk. It will go a long way in helping us understand these different parts. So if you look specifically, Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. Nope, got it wrong. Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. All right, so Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. it will say, these are the generations of heaven and the earth when they were created in the day the Lord God made, and it goes on with that language. All right. And so Genesis 2 verse 4 kind of wraps up Genesis 1 to tell you these are the generations. As you keep reading down through, you will get to, where is it? Genesis chapter 3. I'm not going to waste any more time looking for it, but it's there. They pop up repeatedly throughout Genesis. But like I said, as you start seeing the breakup of, so Genesis 1 ends with Genesis 2:4, which is Toledot. Genesis 2:4 continues reading down through chapter 3, and then you see it again. And so just kind of understanding those conclusion points. Okay, the next thing we're going to get into, and we're going to wrap up on this one today. All right. So as we wrap this up, the final discussion I want to have is this idea of what we call the imago Dei, or the image of God. All right. As you read in Genesis chapter 2, and you kind of get this idea of God creating man in his image. Okay. Actually, Genesis 1 verse 26. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over our cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Cremated he them. All right? Now, from that verse, if you look on page 4 of your notes, here's some facts concerning the image of God. First of all, it is something that belongs to both males and females. So it's obviously not a physical characteristic that would not be shared by both men and women. So the fact that God is a spirit means he probably does not have a physical body like we do, because that's what spirit means. So the whole idea of bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, like, yes, that's something that men and women share, but it's a lot of other things share it too. So I don't know for sure that would fall into that idea of what the image of God is. So it has something to do more with just our physical form. You look at another thing here. Whatever this is distinct from creation, the rest of creation. Because it says that this is something that's given to mankind in order to say, this is special for you. It would make man have characteristics that are similar to God in some way. So notice I'm not telling you what it is yet, because I'm laying out kind of the groundwork of these are some of the things that are present in the image of God. Seems to be something that is completely inherited rather than a partial inheritance. So that's why I wouldn't lean towards something like intelligence or the ability to speak or anything like that, because then you'd be looking at someone who, is dumb, and you'd be like, well, you're no longer in the image of God, so let's kill you, right? Nope. Or, you're not able to speak as well as I do, so you must not be as much in the image of God as I am. Like, you see how that's the thing a lot of people go to when they're like, the image of God is, and they list all these things, and you're like, so do you grow into those? Like, if it's the ability to speak and you never learn to speak, are you just not in the... Anyway, I would never be in the image of God if it was facial hair. It's also the basis for capital punishment. So in Genesis 9 verse 6, take a look at that real quick. In Genesis 9:6 it says this, "Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man." So that's why humans are not to be treated like animals, as in, you can kill animals for food. You don't kill people for food. All right, there's something special about them. All right.
I've done that a few times.
Confession time. The childbirth process seems to be part of passing that on. You'll see this in Genesis 5 verse 3. And so in Genesis 5:3 it says this, "And Adam lived 130 years, and he begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth." So there's something special about Seth that was basically passing on the image. And then you also see Genesis 9:6, in that you kill mankind, you've killed the image of God. Okay? Now, here's, you look like you're struggling. Here is what the image most likely presents. There are attributes of God that he can actually pass on to us. So there could be attributes like love and some of those characteristics. That could be something that is the image of God. Perhaps. Second one, I lean more toward this one. I think the image of God refers more or less to we are God's representatives on this planet. So he's put certain things into our authority. He tells us we are to subdue the earth and we are to be stewards of it. Those are some things that have been given to mankind, which is why when you think about some environmentalists who are like, oh, this earth would be better off if man were dead, you kind of miss the whole purpose of why we're here. The earth was made for us. And how dare you? So those are some of those things. But as you see there in verse 26 of Genesis chapter 1, God says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And that's it. Okay? If you hop to page 5, you'll see a little bit of discussion of Elohim. You'll also see some other passages for creatures and other things that were also called Elohim. So in 1 Samuel 28, Samuel is referred to as Elohim. In Psalm 82, other gods, whatever gods mean, are referred to as Elohim. Demons or angels in Deuteronomy 32 are referred to as Elohim, and then God himself is referred to by his name, Elohim, in Genesis 1:26 and other places. Now, you will notice there on the top of page 5, it says Elohim could be a plural of majesty. I actually take that out and I say no, it couldn't, because Hebrew didn't have a plural of majesty in that context. So most likely Elohim is not the plural of majesty. If you don't know what a plural of majesty, really quick, it's this. Plural of majesty is like when kings are talking and they're like, we are going to make an announcement. I did it in a British accent because they're the pompous ones. All right, but you got that British, the British ruler gets up and like, we are not amused. All right, it was one of them, one lady talking, but she was saying like we, as in like the honorific that is me, we. So anyway, as you deal with it, as far as I understand, Hebrew did not have a plural of majesty in that context. So when God talks and said, let us, he's not sitting there as himself, talking in the plural about himself. It's most likely a reference to the Trinity or a reference to his council, like the spiritual beings who are watching. Now, we know from other passages that God is the only one who actually did the creating. But we know also that angels and spiritual beings were there watching. So Job would tell us that the sons of God shouted for joy at that moment. Okay, so there you go. You'll see another little reference there to today. So here is your homework for tonight. All right, so jot this down. For homework for tonight, I have given you the notes. So I would like you to read up to page 5 in the notes. I know, whopping. All right.
I'm laughing at her writing on a styrofoam plate.
That is amazing. All right, so read up to page 5 in the notes, and then I'd also like you to read this sheet on the days of creation that I gave you. All right, you can read the end notes if you really, really want, but I'm more just interested that you read through the notes. Okay, if you have questions, please bring them in tomorrow. When do we start?
8 a.m.
8 a.m.